So, welcome back to another IPT2. And this week, we're going to talk about an exercise. So, one of the things that often gets discussed around personal trainers and other people is the exercises that we use. And one of those exercises that is so controversial is the deadlift. Now, the deadlift is for myself, the deadlift is king and the squat is queen. And the other compound moves, maybe they're part of the court as well. The rest of the kind of hierarchy of training. But I say the deadlift is king for one reason. The deadlift, you will contract pretty much all of the muscles in the body, or your muscles will be doing something, right down to the little small, minute ones you think you're not using. If you look at anybody doing a deadlift, it is extremely, extremely exertful, especially when you're doing it at a heavy weight, obviously. It burns a lot of calories because of it being a compound move, but also because of all those muscles involved. It literally strengthens pretty much the entire body. But, and there's always a but, the exercise is also one of the exercises that is done so incorrectly across the board because it is sometimes misunderstood. Sometimes it's mistaught to people. Sometimes it's just a case of people cannot do it properly. And then there's people who are in one corner or the other when it comes to which version is the best. Now, all the different versions have their different merits. But if we can, the deadlift itself, the normal version of a deadlift, should be the one that we look at here as king. Now, why people might argue that point. Let's take the sumo deadlift, the version that everybody seems to have controversy around. When we look at powerlifting, powerlifting can be a very incredible sport. And you can see these incredible powerlifters lifting these extreme weights in the sumo position and not the technical normal position. That's because there's less flex in the spine in the movement pattern. There is usually a lot more going on with the muscles of the legs as well, and less strain upon the spine, although there is still strain. And believe me, a powerlifter will tell you what kind of strains they get. It's totally different. And there's just as many injuries picked up doing the sumo version as well. But for those doing powerlifting competitions, they have to lift in that incredible weight, but they don't have to move it as far. When we look at the normal version of a deadlift, the technical normal version of a deadlift, we can see that the bar will travel a bigger distance. And this is why, as well, people who are shorter tend to have a better center of gravity and tend to be able to move heavy weights. I personally am about 6 foot, and I remember training with somebody who was 5, maybe 5'6", 5'7". So good half a foot smaller than me, but their centre of gravity was much better. So when it came to pound for pound lifting, he was able to lift 3 times his body weight, and I was able to lift 2.7 times my body weight, 2.75, something like that, 2.8. And that's incredible, being able to move 3 times your body weight. I wish I got there. I didn't. And it's because my centre of gravity wasn't as low down as his. It's because the bar had to travel further distance when I stood up tall. And that is a part of the movement, that there will be kinetic potential energy when you're at the top of the movement, wanting to pull that bar down. That's why the deadlift is so hard to pick up sometimes from the floor. So we have an exercise that, or a movement pattern within the exercise, the sumo pattern, that allows us to minimize the center of gravity issue, I suppose. And that's why a lot of taller people swear by doing sumo deadlifts. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just another version. And I think all the controversy around the sumo being better than the deadlift normal is a load of crap. Let's be honest about it. It's a load of crap. Now, if somebody says that they can lift heavier than you and you use a different version of deadlift from them, it's not quite a fair competition. So, somebody who's lifting 200 kilos with a sumo, what can they do with a conventional deadlift? They probably will not be doing 200 kilos. So, therefore, that's not a comparison to make. And that's where the debate on the deadlift styles kind of falls apart. So the next time you're having a debate about deadlifts, I would bring that up to the person who says, well, the sumo's better because I can lift heavier weight. That's great that they can, but it's just a different way of doing it. It's like saying bench press when you arch the back and your chest is nearly touching the bar already, and you move that bar 1 inch, but it's 500 kilos, that your way of doing the bench is correct. It's not. It's the purpose of the exercise. So when we look at the purpose of deadlifts, the sumo deadlift is technically a good thing for tall people because they have longer levers. They can usually extend the legs into a position that helps them. The hip mobility might be a little bit better because now the person is able to squat down instead of just hip hinge. It could be better for somebody who is carrying a bit of weight. It could be better uh, in the case of just maximizing weight moved. Again, that change of center of gravity makes a massive difference. So yes, it has its functions. But then if I change the bar that we use for a deadlift to a hex bar or a U bar, and I ask somebody to deadlift, that again changes the center of gravity. It changes how much weight can be moved. A lot of the time, it changes the way that the person does a deadlift. They don't hinge, they squat more. So then when we look at the hex bar or the U bar deadlift, and I remember doing this as well and getting an incredible amount of weight, and then trying to do it with the conventional bar, the straight bar, the Olympic bar, and I wasn't able to do the same weight. I had to rebuild my deadlifts up to the weight that I wanted it to get to with that conventional style bar, with that conventional style of training. So again, bar makes a difference. But then again, it's function We're looking at function here. So the hex bar might be better for function some of the time because, again, with less hip hinge, people tend to not get as many spinal injuries. It does happen because people still round their shoulders and don't do the deadlift as technically well as they could. But we will obviously mitigate some of those issues when we look at the deadlift and using the hex bar. Conventional deadlifts also have variation types that aren't just sumo. And again, this comes down to the person doing the deadlift. So we have our conventional deadlift, the normal way of doing it. You bend down, you pick up the bar, and yeah, that's it. Now, obviously, there's nuances to it. I've simplified the motion there. But then we also have the Romanian deadlift. We also have the hamstring centric deadlift, which is very similar to the Romanian deadlift, but we are touching the bar to the ground, not just sliding down the shins. And again, with the Romanian deadlift, the legs should be a little bit straighter. You might also call the Romanian deadlift a stiff legged deadlift. Again, not everybody can do that because, again, we're comprised differently. And again, that might be something that could injure people. And we also have the quad centric deadlift where we are more of a chest upright position and you use the leg muscles more. It's not quite a sumo because you're not going into a wide stance, but you are obviously more using the quad muscles. So there is variation types within the conventional deadlift itself. But so many trainers, so many people who have come through the course, the personal training course, or I've taught over the years, they have been taught by somebody else or been taught by a video how to do a deadlift. And a lot of the time, they do not have the correct version for the way that they are comprised, for the way that they are able to hip hinge. For instance, somebody who has a very good hip hinge should be able to do a conventional deadlift or a hamstring dominant deadlift or RDL or stiff legged deadlift pretty well. But they might struggle with the quad centric because they might not be able to sit back and down into the squat position as well as hinging at the hips. And vice versa, somebody who is better with the quad dominant version of the deadlift might not be as good at doing the conventional deadlift or the hamstring dominant version. Or in some cases, some of those people find it really hard to actually do an RDL or Romanian deadlift. But does that make them bad at deadlifting? It might be a case that that person is too tall and they struggle because of the way that their body moves and the lever lengths. There's factors in the ankle mobility, there's factors in the knee stability, and the hip movement placement issue, and the way that the hips sit forward or back or how they're rotated. There's so many different nuanced things that you could look at for somebody's performance in the deadlift. But we have to come back all the way to function. And this is where all these arguments kind of fall to the wayside because deadlift is king. Yes, deadlift comes with some things that may go wrong. Yes. So is it the best exercise for your client? Maybe not. But that's why we have to look at it from the point of the goal of the client. Is the client's goal to lose weight? Great, the deadlift would be helpful. Is the client's goal to increase muscle mass? Then the deadlift would probably be helpful. Although what day that you put that deadlift on is really going to be something that is down to their availability. Is the deadlift a specific back exercise? That's a question to ask. When it's utilizing so many different muscles, could you use it on a different day? Might it be best placed on a leg day? Because there technically would be less stress on the upper body, although we're using the arms, the shoulders, the core, the back, even the chest when you're puffing it out at the top has to take some of the strain. So there is so many different things going on with the deadlift that it's hard to place it as an exercise as well. Typically, though, people will have it on back day because they tend to feel it in the back. It tends to be a great exercise for building thickness in the body. It tends to be a great exercise for building overall strength in the body. So maybe those are goals that you are looking at. But if you're not looking at any of those goals, why is the deadlift in there? Why is it something that you're doing with your client? If your client has bad mobility and they're not quite ready for a deadlift, there are different versions. Obviously, we spoke about the hex bar being used, we spoke about the U bar, but we also have core bags, we have Bulgarian bags, we have kettlebells, and they may not be heavy. They may not be exactly the kind of strain you want to put on a client. But who's to say the deadlift has to be your first exercise and has to be heavy? May it be better placed somewhere else with a lighter weight as a secondary exercise? That's a question again to ask yourself. So, with this exercise, with the controversy, with all the arguments that people put in place with the deadlift being this or that, the factors that really come into play are just what are the client's goals? Does it deserve a place in the program? Or is it something that you might build up to later on? Now, you might have a client who just wants to learn how to deadlift better, but please always go and look at a client's deadlift or get them to video it at the very least before you program heavier weights into the program. Before you put them in a place where they could injure themselves, and believe me, clients will injure themselves, especially if they are too heavy with the weight and the technique's not correct. And we haven't even discussed technique at this point, and that's a different thing altogether. Feet placement, the way that the body angles when it moves, the bar movement, uh, the client's ability to maintain strength through the core. There's so many different factors that we really need to look at to make sure that this exercise is really the best thing for the client. But ultimately, have a look at the goals of the client. Ultimately, make sure that the deadlift deserves its place in their program and it's not just put there because, I need to get them a compound move on back day. That's not a good enough reason to include a deadlift. Every exercise that you ask a client to do should have a rationale, should really have a reason for being there. And if it doesn't, then it doesn't deserve its place. There's other exercises that you can do on back day or leg day. There's other exercises that you can do that are compound in basis. You don't need to have the deadlift there unless it's warranted. So maybe that's something to think about. But just to end the podcast, We'd love to know what you think about the deadlift. What's your thoughts on what we call the king of all exercises? Does it deserve its place as king? Or do you think there's something better out there? Add it into the comments below. Let us know if you want to hear more about different exercises or even more about the deadlift and its variations itself. But till next time, guys, make sure to take care. Make sure that you are PTing well. See you soon.